Follow us on social media at KC Starlight and subscribe.
That's right. Take 3.
Take 3. So follow along with the next episode of Talkin With Taylor. I really should write this down. I need to write this down. Everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Talkin With Taylor. Today we're talking about my favorite topic, the Tony Awards. If you watch my show, you know how much I love the Tony Awards. So I'm joined today by not only the CEO of Starlight, Rich Baker, but my boss.
Yeah, that's
So I'm
true.
going to be on my best behavior today. But we were talking about the Tony Awards, and so something that's very little known, I didn't know about it until today, is that Rich is a Tony voter, and that is baffling to me. So let's talk about it.
You're surprised that I am?
Okay. I didn't know who would be a Tony voter.
Okay.
So tell me, so when did you become a Tony voter?
Actually, now probably almost 30 years ago.
Wow.
Long time. That was back when they actually had corporate members for Tony Awards,
Okay.
and they no longer do that.
Okay. So what did the process, what was it like then? So it was a corporate...
Well, back then, the rules are still similar. You have to, at least on the Broadway League side, you have to be either a presenter or producer and a full member of the Broadway League. But years ago, I hate to date myself, but years ago, they actually had corporate memberships. And so the Fox Theater, which I worked at the time, had a corporate membership which allowed us 5 Tony voters.
Okay. Well, because in my mind, in my country mind, I was thinking, you had to be Bernadette Peters to be a Tony voter, and that was pretty much it, right?
Yeah.
Do you remember what the first season was that you kind of voted on?
Oh gosh, no, honestly I don't. I should have, but
Let's
I don't.
do a test. What was the show every 30 years?
Really?
So how has the process changed over the years? So, I mean, you said, it was kind of this corporate process, but has it always been kind of the same? You go to New York, you see these shows, and...
Well, it's a similar process. The only way it's changed, as far as I know, is on the Broadway League side. There's approximately 850 Tony voters currently, and that stays somewhere around that same because as some roll off, some come on. And the majority of those are members of the Broadway League. And to be a member of the Broadway League, you have to be a producer or presenter, and the rules are somewhat complex, but on the presenter side, which is how we qualify, or how I qualify, is you have to present at least 4 full weeks of Broadway in a year. And so you have to not only be a Broadway League member, but maintain that, or you lose your Tony voter status as well.
Gotcha.
Now, there are additional members as well on the theater wing side, which the theater wing was actually predated the Broadway League, and they were the ones that started the Tony Awards. But then when the Broadway League came along, they combined and made it a joint effort. But the theater wing was set up as actually, believe it or not, it started out with 7 suffragettes way back in 1917 that started it, but their whole purpose is to support theater and the arts throughout the country. And so members of their advisory board goes on it, as do the boards of a lot of the actors trade, the Actors Equity, Dramatists Guild, folks like that. So there are representatives from all aspects of theater as Tony voters.
Well, I'm learning something new
So
every
Bernadette
day.
Peters may very well be a Tony voter.
I hope so. I hope she's got her little ballot box. Well, I'm learning something new. I'm going to go look up these suffragettes.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
This is all a new world to me.
Really?
So there's a lot of pomp and circumstance around the Tonys. So it's not just one night.
Right.
So what are some of the events that lead up to the Tonys?
Well, probably the biggest event is that when the nomination cutoff is,
Right.
because that's every year. It's like you got to squeeze in and get your show open before that. This year it happens to be April 26th. It's usually right around the end of April.
Gotcha.
And then nominations are always that first week of. The nominations get announced the first week of May. Then there's other various events. There's a Tony Award luncheon for the people who got nominated, things like that. But it all really ends up on this year, June 10th, with the Tony Awards, and it's always on a Sunday night.
Gotcha. So what's the actual process? And do you go in a little box with a red, white, and blue curtain, and you get a little I vote?
No, you don't get that. They actually mail your ballot to you,
Okay.
and you fill it out, and then you have to sign your name on the outside envelope, and that's how they compare your signature to the one they have on file. And then when they pull your ballot out of that envelope, they discard the envelope and it goes in with all the other ballots. And the only people that truly know the answers before the show, obviously a few of the technical people have to know, but other than that, it really is the accounting firm that tabulates all that.
And they have to get it right.
Yeah, they have to get it right.
We have seen, you know.
Right, and so far, the Tonys they have.
They've been good. They're on
Right.
it. They're on it. Just, keep Faye and Warren away.
Absolutely.
So what's the most challenging part? I mean, when you get that in the mail and you've got this in front of you?
Well, to me, the most challenging part is a road member, because quite a few of the Tony voters are road members, or what we call road members. Obviously, some of the Broadway League members live in New York, so it's much easier for them to see all the shows. The road members actually have to go into New York to see the shows, because only shows that are on Broadway in New York are eligible for nomination. And sometimes it's just keeping up with all those shows. Now, I combine them with trips to make all the Broadway League meetings and stuff like that, but there's times where you're seeing as many as like 13 shows in 10 days just to catch up. So then it's just keeping them straight in your mind. Now, every Tony voter is different, but one thing that helps me is I do keep a copy of all the playbills, which helps to jog your memory, and if you have to look up a name or something, of course, the cast list is always in there. And that really comes in handy when you're sitting down and looking at that ballot, sometimes as long as almost a year after you saw the show.
Right, gotcha. So bringing it back home to Starlight, bringing it back home to Kansas City, so, you're out on the road, you're seeing all these amazing shows. How does that affect what comes back home to Starlight?
Well, two things. First, it's very helpful that not only do I have to see all the shows, but I get to see all the shows, because that really helps me decide what we should try and get here at Starlight. And I will tell you that just because it wins a Tony doesn't necessarily mean it's the best show out there. But so in the process, a lot of times you'll see some runners up that may be a better show for our audience than the Tony Award show. Now, obviously, whenever we can get a Tony Award winner, we try and do that because our audience expects that. But there's a lot of shows that don't win a Tony that are very good shows.
So what makes a show eligible to be up for a Tony?
Okay. Well, we briefly talked about that. First, it does have to occur on Broadway. Off-Broadway shows don't qualify. There's an incredibly long list of Tony rules, so you have to follow those as well. But it's interesting, there is a nominating committee that ultimately determines that. And it's about 50 of the professionals on Broadway, some from Broadway League, some actors and actresses, some from the theater wing, and they get together, and if there's any question on which category it goes in or that sort of thing, they make all those decisions. And there have been some, questions over the time period as whether they made the right decision, but their decision is final, and we go with that. You do have to fit in one of the 26 current categories, although interestingly enough, Actors Equity is now pushing for 2 new ones for both chorus and ensemble. We'll see if that happens. But right now there's 26 categories, and you get nominated in one of those categories. Probably the most contentious part is whether you're in a leading role or a supporting role. Sometimes, especially if you have 2, let's say, famous actresses or actors, sometimes they'll put them in different categories so they don't compete against each other, and that's usually when there's some of those questions about where they really categorized right. But that's basically how it works, and if for most cases, if you open on Broadway and you open by the deadline, you qualify. Although interesting enough, that people may not realize, you only get one shot at it. So I don't care if your show runs for 20 years, you're really only eligible for a Tony the first year that you open up.
So if you're there for 30 years,
you may be a great show, and so sometimes if you just open in the wrong year, and that's why I was talking about, there's some very good shows out there that don't win Tonys. Let's face it, in the year that Hamilton or the producers were there were a lot of good shows that in a normal year might win Tonys, but in those particular years, they all went towards those shows.
Right. So let's dish a little bit.
Okay.
So have you been to the Tonys?
I have been to the Tonys.
Okay.
Probably 4 or 5 times at least.
Okay.
I typically do not go every year. In my prior employment at the Fox Theater, we actually had a producing arm, so we produced shows on Broadway.
Gotcha.
So going to the Tonys is not only a very expensive proposition. So when I tried to limit it to was if we had a show of our own that was up for a Tony Award, then I would go attend the awards.
Gotcha.
Otherwise, it really is just a big party.
Right.
And although it's nice nice to go occasionally, it's probably not worth the expense on a normal basis.
So do you have any good stories? Anything favorite come to mind? Did you?
Well, I did sit right behind Liam Neeson and his wife, Natasha Richardson, at the time.
Wow.
And she is stunningly beautiful, even more beautiful in person than she is, But it is funny, when you sit in the Tony Awards, if you've ever been to one of those award shows, it's almost like you have to stay there all night, because the minute you get up, there's a seat filler, and you don't really have time to even run to the restroom. So you don't drink a lot. You try and sit there and stay in your seat.
Don't move.
And the other thing that's interesting that people don't realize, of course, everybody's dressed to the nines in tuxes and long dresses and everything else, and it's always incredibly hot in there because they have all the studio lights not only on the stage but on the audience as well. So it's usually not terribly fun because you're sitting there sweating and you can't go anywhere, but it is an experience, and it's something that honestly would be great for everybody to do once at least.
I love it. Well, maybe I'll go with you next time.
There you go.
I fit well in a carry-on case.
Absolutely.
Usually, if I really, don't eat for a couple of days. I want to talk about the party afterwards, because really what I care about is what they serve to eat, because I really just want to eat.
Trust me, it's not about the food, it's all about the drink.
Okay. Oh, well, I like a drink too.
And what you do learn is that you find out which actresses and actors really drink way too much, and which ones don't.
Well, thanks so much, Rich, for joining me today and talking with me and giving me kind of the backstory on the Tonys. And now I know. Now I'm going to be an even bigger fan. I'm going to have to throw a party or something.
And we're going to have to get you there. Obviously.
Yeah, and I'm going to have to go. And this is the guy that can get me there. So, well, thanks again for joining me. And so stay current with all new episodes of Talkin' with Taylor. Follow along on social media at Casey Starlight and subscribe to our YouTube channel below.